I was standing in my wedding dress veil, still pinned, when I heard my future mother-in-law laugh. "She brought that man here," she said loud enough for the guests at table 6 to flinch. "That's not a father. That's a mistake in a suit." The room went quiet. Then someone at her table chuckled. And then my fiancé laughed. Not the nervous kind. Not the surprised kind. The cruel kind, the kind that says, "I knew they'd say it and I don't care." My father had been silent all evening. He wore his only suit, the one he kept from his days working security at the courthouse. He'd skipped meals for weeks just to rent the old pickup that got us there. And now he was being laughed at. By the people who were supposed to become my family. Something in me cracked. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked to the front of the room, took the mic from the band's singer, and said 7 words that froze the entire venue. "This wedding is no longer taking place." And then, I did something they never saw coming, something that by morning shattered the life they thought was untouchable. I'm Liliana Quinn. I restore antique pieces for a living, but lately I've been restoring something much harder, myself. That night wasn't just the end of a wedding. It was the end of silence, of shame, of pretending I didn't see what I saw. What happened after changed everything. Not just for them, for me too. The room smelled of roses and starch. I stood still in the center of a vast dressing chamber inside the Magnolia House in Savannah, where 100 years ago, President Theodore Roosevelt once dined under chandeliers, not unlike the one hanging over my head now. Today, it was my wedding dress fitting. Tomorrow, I was supposed to get married. The silk creaked softly as I shifted my weight. Around me, a sea of pastel tulle swirled, bridesmaids picked by the Kingsley family stylists, murmuring measurements, and Lillian Kingsley, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, observing from a velvet armchair, like a queen in waiting. Her eyes narrowed as she appraised the gown I had chosen, French silk hand-stitched lace, bought from a local atelier in Charleston, not a designer showroom in New York. "Is this real, Ely Saab?" she asked in a voice that floated just loud enough to sting. "It looks like something from a Florence flea market." I looked at myself in the mirror, but I didn't really see the dress. I saw a 12-year-old girl in a workshop, lit by a single bulb, sanding the leg of a walnut table, beside a man with sawdust in his hair and a crooked smile. My father, Henry Quinn, a self-taught woodworker, who raised me alone after my mother passed. We lived on the edge of Savannah in a wooden house no bigger than the tool shed of this mansion. But it had windows that creaked when the wind blew, and a porch swing we fixed 3 times with bent nails and stubborn hope. That house was made of love and noise and long hours. He worked late into the night fixing broken furniture, breathing new life into discarded things. I learned to hold a chisel before I held a fork properly. I learned patience by watching him polish time-worn brass until it gleamed again. I could still hear his voice sometimes. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small, Elle." But here, under this chandelier, surrounded by women with manicured hands and judgment in their eyes, I did feel small. "Turn around, dear," Lillian said, waving her fingers. "Let's see the back." As I turned, I caught sight of a figure through the frosted glass of the dressing room door. A broad-shouldered man in a second-hand suit, arms folded, standing patiently in the hallway. My heart stilled. Henry. I knew that suit. He had spent 3 nights altering it by hand in our kitchen seams, pinned with care fabric pressed under a borrowed iron. When I stepped out to greet him, the hallway went quiet. My father looked at me with soft wonder in his eyes, but there was a flicker of tension, not with me, but with the opulence around us. I saw the way his gaze passed over the marble floors, the heavy velvet curtains, and lingered on the stylists who had gone silent at his presence. He smiled, but I saw his jaw tighten for half a second. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, voice steady. I reached out and squeezed his hand. He didn't flinch, but I could feel the work in his palms, the years. We stood there like 2 shadows in a hallway, too bright, too clean, too far from the creaky wooden floorboards of our world. I smiled at him, but inside something had shifted. A seed of unease took root deep in my gut. As we walked back toward the car, his footsteps quiet beside mine, I wondered, is the path I'm on still my own? Or am I walking deeper into a life that no longer carries my name? 2 years earlier, under the wide Carolina sky, the Charleston Antique Fair bustled with heat, history, and opinions. I was crouched under a pop-up tent, bent over an 18th-century Florentine picture frame, brushing decades of grime from the gilded carvings when I first heard his voice. "You're restoring it backward." I looked up to find a man in a navy sport coat and white linen shirt, pointing at the frame like he'd caught me cheating on a test. "You're Jasper Kingsley, right?" I asked, brushing dust off my hands. I knew the name Kingsley Gallery had the biggest antique showroom on the East Coast. He knelt beside me without invitation, inspecting the frame with curious eyes. "It's not Florentine. It's Spanish colonial. Late 1700s. The wood's wrong for Italy." "It's poplar, not cedar," I corrected. "And this corner, see the ornamental vine? That's Tuscan." He looked at me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "You really see them, don't you?" he said. I didn't know what he meant until he added, "These pieces. You treat them like they're still alive." That was the beginning. Jasper started visiting my booth regularly. He asked too many questions, stayed too long, and brought espresso. Eventually, he showed up at my workshop in Charleston and rolled up his sleeves. He wanted to learn, he said, about wood grain and shellac, about how I sanded without flattening sole. He said he envied my hands. "I grew up in a world where everything is bought," he once told me. You build things." His admiration felt sincere. So when he asked me to attend a dinner at his family home in Savannah, I said yes. The Kingsley estate looked like something out of a Southern Gothic novel. White columns, wrought iron balconies, and gold-framed oil portraits lined the walls. Cornelius Kingsley greeted me with a smile too sharp to be warm. "Ah," he said, "the artist who turns junk into charm." Lillian offered me a drink and a silk box with a pair of ivory gloves inside. "For the next time you meet our clients," she said with a tilt of her head, "we wouldn't want them distracted by calluses." She said it with a smile, the kind that wraps a barb in lavender-scented lace. Across the room, my father sat stiffly on an embroidered chair, hands folded. He had brought a hand-carved wooden box as a house gift, dark oak inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a piece he'd spent 3 weeks crafting. It ended up in the gallery's hallway display case labeled "Folk Art from Regional Artisans," a compliment and a cage all in one. The next morning, Jasper pulled me aside with a proposal. "Kingsley Gallery is heading to the International Art and Heritage Expo. I want to represent your work, but legally you'd need to authorize me to sign on the studio's behalf." It was flattering. It felt like trust. So I signed. 3 weeks later, I saw the first promotional flyer, curated by Jasper Kingsley. My name was nowhere. When I brought it up, he didn't flinch. "You're the art. I'm just the face. It's better this way, cleaner." I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just walked back to the studio, slid the silk gloves into a box, and turned the key in the drawer. Not everyone who wears a wedding ring understands the weight it's meant to carry. The room was quiet, too quiet for the night before a wedding. Upstairs at the Magnolia House, surrounded by cream-colored walls and expensive crown molding, I sat alone in a bridal suite large enough to hold a dozen people. But it was just me. No laughter, no champagne, no one fixing curls or fluffing veils. Jasper was downstairs having dinner with his parents, and several prominent art collectors flown in from New York and Paris. I hadn't been invited. "It's more of a business thing," he'd said casually, brushing a kiss on my cheek like I should understand. So I stayed here listening to the faint echo of clinking glasses through the vents, the occasional swell of laughter I wasn't part of. I reached for my phone and called my father. It rang twice. "Hey, El," he answered, voice low and steady like it always had been. "Hi, Dad. You okay?" "I'm fine." There was a pause. Then he asked quietly, "Are you happy?" My throat tightened. I hesitated just long enough for him to notice, but I forced the words out anyway. "I'm fine," I repeated. After we hung up, I held the phone to my chest for a long time. Then I cried. The kind of crying that has no sound, only a shaking body and a breaking heart. The last time Jasper and I had argued flashed through my mind. It was 2 months ago when I refused to restore a marble statue that had no provenance. "It's probably just a reproduction," I had said. "We shouldn't put the Kingsley name behind it." "It's still beautiful," he had replied. "Sometimes art doesn't have to be authentic to have value. I won't put my name on something that isn't real." "That's your problem, Elle," he said. "You're too precious about purity. Art needs to move, to bend a little." That had stayed with me. Later that night, I went through some old paperwork, unease growing in my stomach like rot. I found an invoice from Kingsley Gallery for a Spanish chest listed as 17th century, but I knew that piece. I had touched it, cleaned it. It was a fake. The provenance was fabricated and the authentication form bore Lillian's signature. I felt sick. Then something worse, a portfolio from our Charleston show last spring, where I had sketched and designed a restoration plan for a rare Venetian mirror. Those sketches, my sketches, were presented under Cornelius's name during a private auction. Jasper had given them to him without my consent. When I confronted him, his response was calm, even gentle. "I thought you'd be proud," he said. "My family valued it enough to use it." He didn't understand. He never had. That night, I opened the old leather-bound notebook my mother had left me before she passed, a book of half-finished thoughts, recipes, lullabies, and hopes. On a blank page, I wrote a single sentence: "If something goes wrong tomorrow, I won't let Dad lower his head." I tore the page out, folded it twice, and tucked it into the inside pocket of Henry's suit jacket. It was hanging in the hallway where he'd left it after carefully brushing off a speck of lint earlier. My hands shook. There were no candles lit in that room, no scent of wedding roses or perfume. Just me and silence. And a growing sense that tomorrow wasn't going to be the beginning of anything, it was going to be the reckoning. The sun broke through the oak trees and scattered gold across the courtyard. Everything was bathed in warm light, polished to perfection from the crystal glasses to the imported orchids lining the aisles. There were 205 guests, each dressed in their finest, gathered beneath ivory drapery that billowed in the breeze. The violinists played something delicate and distant. I stood at the far end of the aisle, dressed in a gown stitched by hands I knew. Handmade lace traced my arms, every thread reminding me of nights I spent hunched over a table with nothing but faith and fabric. Henry sat near the front in a linen suit that still bore signs of careful mending. Beside him was an empty chair. It was meant for my mother. They had left it empty at my request, but seeing it now made the day feel incomplete, like there was a hollow space no music could fill. Lillian took the stage first. She spoke with poise, smiling graciously at the crowd. "Liliana is a beautiful representation of the American dream," she said. From humble beginnings, her father's woodworking shop, to joining the Kingsley family and our gallery's legacy. We are proud to welcome her. The applause was polite. Cornelius followed. "It's not every day a simple craftsman raises a daughter with such polish and refinement," he said. "Truly remarkable." Light laughter bubbled from a few guests. My fingers curled in my lap. I glanced at Henry. He was sitting tall, unmoving, but I saw him set his silverware down slowly and deliberately. His shoulders were rigid, eyes fixed ahead. The muscles in his jaw twitched once and then went still. A toast was called. Glasses were lifted. The servers poured champagne into flutes that shimmered in the sun. I was barely listening until I heard something that sliced through the hum of conversation like a blade. "That's not a father," Lillian whispered to a guest beside her, her voice half laughing. "That's a mistake in a suit." I froze. Next to me, Jasper chuckled. Not loudly, Not with hesitation, just a quiet, clipped laugh like it was a private joke he understood all too well. I turned to him. "You think that's funny?" He shrugged. "It's just the way my family jokes." There it was. No defense, no apology, no reaching for my hand, just a shrug as if that made it easier. He had once told me, "I'll be your fortress L. No one gets through unless I let them." But the fortress had fallen, and now I saw the bricks had always been hollow. I stood. The music faltered. Someone near the back gasped. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. My voice was even. "Thank you," I said, looking at Lillian, at Cornelius, at Jasper, "for making it so clear what I would have been marrying into." I pulled the ring from my finger and placed it on the linen tablecloth. It caught the sunlight for a brief second before tipping over. The glass of champagne before me had been filled too high, and with my movement, it spilled. Gold liquid trickled onto the pristine white cloth, staining it in slow, spreading circles. I looked at the stain and thought, some things don't wash out. I turned to Henry, held out my hand. He rose without hesitation. We walked together past rows of stunned faces, down the marble steps into the open air. The wind caught the hem of my dress and lifted it ever so slightly. Somewhere behind me, my napkin fluttered to the ground. I didn't look back. We walked toward the exit, father and daughter, leaving behind the perfect chairs and overflowing glasses, the half-finished vows, and the people who never truly saw us. And in that moment, beneath the trees of Savannah, I felt more married to my truth than I ever could have been to their legacy. The river outside murmured like a lullaby for the sleepless. Inside the dimly lit diner, the kind that never closed, Liliana sat across from her father. The scent of bitter coffee hung between them, the kind they used to sip once a year on her birthday, always at the same table by the fogged-up window. Her wedding dress had been folded carefully into a garment bag lying forgotten across two chairs behind her. She wore jeans and a navy sweater now, but her hands still trembled as they clutched the chipped ceramic mug. It wasn't the cold. It was the kind of shaking that came when too many truths finally cracked open at once. Henry sat still, his calloused fingers wrapped loosely around his own cup. His eyes were quiet like always, but they held no trace of surprise. "You don't need to say anything," he finally murmured. "I wasn't going to," Liliana whispered back. They sat like that for a while, the buzz of the fluorescent light above them soft and irregular. Eventually, Henry spoke again. "You don't have to run. But if you decide to start again, I'll walk the first mile beside you." Liliana looked down at the table. A ring-shaped stain had bloomed under her mug, dark against the pale formica. "I'm not running. I just can't breathe in a world where dignity's treated like something optional. Like a table decoration." Henry nodded slowly. "Then let's make you a different kind of world." She unlocked her phone and scrolled, then paused, reading the subject line of the email that had landed earlier that evening. It was brief, precise confirmation from the Charleston law firm. The purchase of 52% controlling shares in Kingsley Gallery had been finalized. The transfer had occurred legally, silently, and irrevocably through 3 independent investment firms she had quietly formed over the last 3 months. Each had been designed to look like art foundations, not unlike those Jasper's family donated to for tax breaks. She didn't say anything aloud, not yet. But she looked up, and for the first time in days, her eyes no longer looked bruised by exhaustion. "You used to say justice doesn't knock when it enters. It just walks in and waits." Henry raised a brow. "Sounds like something I'd say. I want to see what happens when it walks in wearing heels." A brief chuckle from her father. He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a note. Liliana froze. "I found this in my vest pocket this morning," he said. It was the note she'd written the night before, folded and hidden in the jacket she knew he'd wear to walk her down the aisle. "If I don't smile today, don't ask me why." He slid the paper across the table to her. "I didn't ask. I knew, but I smiled anyway. Someday you'll smile again too." Her hands stopped trembling. Her fingers closed gently over the paper, like it was something fragile and alive. They both leaned back. Liliana's eyes drifted around the old cafe. Her gaze landed on the circular booth where they'd sat when she was 14, and her scholarship rejection letter had come in. She had cried into a grilled cheese sandwich while Henry told her that one letter never wrote the ending of a story. Now they were back. Same booth, same wooden door creaking open and closed in the background. Different chapter. Liliana finished her coffee, set down the mug with finality. Tomorrow I'm walking into that boardroom. I won't raise my voice. I won't throw things. Henry watched her. What will you do? She smiled, faint and sharp. I'll rewrite the name on the invitations. Outside, the street lamp flickered. Inside, Henry checked his old pocket watch, then glanced up. It's almost midnight, he said. Time to get back to the workshop. And this time, Liliana stood without hesitation. Her hands were steady now. Morning came with the crisp bite of early spring. Liliana walked up the limestone steps of the Kingsley Gallery, wearing a charcoal blazer and calm resolve. Her hair was pinned back simply, and in her hands she carried a single black folder. The building, a stately 3-story structure wrapped in creeping ivy and self-importance, stood as it had for decades, unchallenged, polished, revered. That would change today. The meeting had been hastily called just hours after the final legal confirmations. As primary shareholder by majority stake, she had the authority. And now the timing. Inside the mahogany-paneled boardroom, Cornelius Kingsley stood near the fireplace, gripping a tumbler of something amber. Lillian sat poised at the head of the table, fingers laced, lips tight. Jasper leaned back in his chair, pale but pretending nonchalance. 3 external board members had also arrived. They were silent as Liliana stepped in. Ms. Quinn, Lillian said coolly. I suppose congratulations are in order. Liliana placed the folder in front of her and took the remaining seat. Let's not waste time. She opened the folder, pulling out notarized copies of the stock transfers, one from each of the art foundations, now traced back to her. All legitimate, all binding. Cornelius's face flushed. This is a hostile takeover. It's a lawful transaction under the terms your firm set, Liliana replied evenly. Nothing hostile, just quiet. You manipulated the system, Lillian hissed. I studied it, Liliana said. And I learned well. Jasper stood abruptly. We can't operate like this. No, Liliana said. You can't operate like this anymore. She pulled out a second set of documents. I'm initiating a full audit. 3 years of financials, all acquisitions, all auctions. I've brought a legal team to begin today. A man in a navy suit entered silently, nodding to the board. Liliana didn't glance back. One of the board members, Mrs. Howard, narrowed her eyes. Mr. Kingsley, she said to Cornelius, do you deny the inflated appraisals on recent ledger entries? Cornelius opened his mouth, then closed it. Jasper cleared his throat. There may have been discrepancies. We were assured. Lillian turned on him. You were supposed to support the family. Supporting lies isn't the same thing, Jasper said quietly. Lillian's voice rose. You'd side with her over your own mother. And in that moment, as her fury bubbled, she added, after all we did to keep her inside the brand, we even used her designs. What else did she want? The room went still. Liliana clicked her pen. Thank you, she said. That statement will be included in the lawsuit regarding intellectual property theft. You just acknowledged it was never licensed. Lillian blanched. Cornelius stepped back. I suggest, Liliana added, you retain counsel. She stood gathering her folder and nodded once to the stunned board. Without another word, she walked out. Down the polished corridor, past the curated displays and artful deceit. At the main doors, she paused, looking up at the gilded name across the archway, Kingsley Gallery. She breathed in. Not for much longer. 2 weeks had passed since the boardroom rupture. The name Kingsley was no longer just a gallery, it had become a headline. The Savannah elite murmured behind drawn curtains and lifted teacups, wondering how a wedding had turned into a war. Back in Charleston, I tried to keep the studio moving. Orders slowed. My team noticed the phone ringing less. I pretended it was a seasonal dip, but I knew better. Then it began. A column in the Savannah Morning News ran with a photo from the wedding me in the ivory gown, eyes looking somewhere far off. The headline read, "Bride or Boardroom Bandit." The article painted me as a social climber, a cunning girl who'd used her bouquet as a battering ram to seize the gallery. Worse still, it dragged Henry into it. They called him an unpolished woodworker from nowhere, lacking the refinement to raise a daughter among patrons. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the article, hands clenched so tightly the paper wrinkled at the edges. Within days, clients pulled commissions. A partner removed my name from their featured collaborators page. One morning I opened the studio to find the front glass cracked, and across the wall someone had spray-painted "Greedy Fraud." Then came the letter. No return address, just a folded sheet inside. "You ruined a legacy. You'll be next." That night, Henry found me in the workshop, sitting in the dark beside an unfinished frame. "We don't hide from storms, kid," he said. "But if you need to build a new house from the rubble, I'll hold the hammer." I gave him a tired smile. "I'm not running, Dad. I just didn't think the price of integrity would be this loud." The next day, Jasper appeared. He stood outside the studio like a ghost, hair disheveled, sleeves rolled up, eyes sunken with something that looked too much like regret. "I need to talk," he said. I didn't move, but I didn't close the door either. He stepped in slowly, like entering a memory. "Lillian's drinking heavily. Dad's health is deteriorating. You've lit a fire none of us can control." I said nothing. He sank to one knee. "I made mistakes. I chose silence when I should have spoken. But Liliana, I still love you." Love. That word had once meant museum halls lit in amber, fingers brushing across varnish, quiet laughter over shared sketches. But love without spine, what use was that? "You let them laugh at my father," I said. "You let them humiliate me." "I was afraid. And I was alone," I replied. He left without another word. That night, Henry sat beside me and spoke of my mother. "She was once offered a scholarship," he said. "It would have changed her career. But the condition was she had to cut ties with her family, too poor, too rural, too unrefined. She turned it down." He paused. "She told me once, if dignity has to be bartered for acceptance, it isn't worth the seat at the table." I looked around the studio, the scent of pine and polish in the air, and whispered to no one, "If I have to crawl through mud to reach the light, I'll do it upright." It was a bright morning, but Savannah's courthouse felt wrapped in fog. 1 month after the audit began, the city gathered journalists jostling for a glimpse, socialites in dark sunglasses pretending disinterest, and a line of former clients murmuring behind gloved hands. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. On the defendant's bench sat Cornelius, face tight as lacquered oak. Lillian wore a gray suit too sharp for sympathy. Jasper sat to their right, hands clasped, eyes shadowed. I stepped in head high, holding a folded copy of the newspaper that had once smeared my name. Our attorney opened with clarity, laying out documents, signed invoices, and bank transfers that told a story no headline could reshape. Cornelius had authorized payments to suppliers that didn't exist. Lillian had overseen falsified documentation tied to ancient urns with forged provenance. The Kingsley Heritage Fund, meant to support young artists, was missing $1.7 million. Then came the surprise. A man in his 40s rose from the gallery seating. A former Kingsley staff member, he swore in, took the stand and spoke clearly. "Lillian instructed me to falsify a chain of custody record," he said. "She said, and I quote, 'We don't sell truth, we sell the idea of taste.'" He held up a printed email, its subject line damning. I sat still. My heart beat, not out of triumph but relief. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from notes. "I am not here to ask for sympathy," I said. "I am here for justice, not just for me, but for every pair of hands that built something only to be told it wasn't enough. For every father in a borrowed suit called a mistake." A hush fell over the room. Lillian took the stand, her voice cracked. I loved Liliana. I saw her as my own. I shook my head. No mother tells her daughter she is dirt in a silk house. I held up the wrinkled paper. The very one that called Henry a disgrace. This is how you framed my father, I said. But today, I choose to frame the truth. Outside the courthouse, the wind tugged at my coat. That afternoon, headlines shifted. The fight for honor. Liliana Quinn and the scandal at Kingsley. People began to see. Investors pulled out of Kingsley Gallery. Public outrage grew. Protests appeared outside the gallery steps. Petitions called for criminal charges. As Henry and I walked down the courthouse steps, I turned to him. I thought I did all this to protect myself, I said. But now I know I did it for you. He didn't answer. He just held my hand tighter. A week had passed since the hearing. The Kingsley Gallery had been officially frozen, its operations halted pending full investigation. The once pristine limestone building now stood eerily silent, its front steps cordoned off. Upstairs, where Lillian's private office used to hum with curated chaos, the lights were out. The doors were locked. Furniture sat under white sheets like forgotten relics. Back in Charleston, the workshop felt different. The silence wasn't heavy, it was cleansing. But Liliana knew better than to mistake quiet for peace. She was still fielding follow-ups from investigators, sending in documents cross-checking past transactions. She worked in short, focused bursts, then returned to sanding a carved mantel or repairing a fractured mosaic, tasks that demanded rhythm, not thought. On a Wednesday morning, a plain envelope arrived by mail. No return address, only her name written in neat blue ink. She knew the handwriting. Inside the letter read, I laughed when I should have spoken. I stood still when you needed me to move. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I do want to leave the shadow my family cast. I'm leaving Savannah. I won't work in antiques again. We are two different people, Liliana, and you deserve to walk unshadowed, fully seen. There was no phone number, no plea to reconnect, just space carefully given. That afternoon, the bell above the studio door rang. Lillian stood there. She looked nothing like the woman who once swept through gallery rooms in heels and cashmere. Her makeup was gone. Her coat was frayed. Her hands trembled. I need a minute, she said. Please. Liliana didn't offer her a chair. Lillian stood in the center of the room between stacks of reclaimed wood and shelves of ceramic tiles. I came to ask, Lillian began, voice cracking, if you'd consider pulling one section of the evidence. Just one. It would reduce Cornelius's sentence. He's not well. You're asking me to erase truth, Liliana said. I misjudged your father. I see that now. But I was only trying to protect the legacy. No, Liliana replied. You were trying to protect your version of it. A legacy built on silence isn't legacy. It's a shadow. Lillian's voice dropped to a whisper. I'll give you the gallery. Liliana shook her head. I don't want anything handed over out of pity. I'm building something that's mine with my own hands. Behind them, Henry was quietly fixing a table leg. He looked up, briefly nodded once in acknowledgement. Lillian met his eyes, then lowered hers. She walked out slowly, and when the door closed behind her, it did so softly, but without hesitation. That night, Liliana received an email from the National Library of New Orleans. They were hosting the Autumn International Craft Heritage Fair and invited her to exhibit. They asked for a personal artifact, something symbolic of her journey. She went to the back room, opened a glass cabinet, and gently lifted out the wooden clock she and Henry had restored together when she was 12. It was the first thing she'd ever worked on. She wiped away the fine layer of dust, wrapped it in velvet cloth, and set it carefully in a shipping box. She included a typed note, crafted by Henry Quinn, restored by his daughter, for the legacy of hands that never let go. She added one more letter, this one handwritten, no recipient listed, just one line: I forgive, but I do not forget. 2 months later, the old 24-hour cafe by the river in Savannah had changed owners, but not its soul. The same antique wall clock still ticked slow and steady. The menu was still scrawled in white chalk. The same booth with its leather seats worn and familiar still faced the window where sunlight spilled through late in the day. Liliana sat across from Henry. Between them sat 2 cups of black coffee and a slice of apple pie, the kind her mother used to make around the holidays. It was quiet for a long while, but it wasn't awkward. Just full. Henry broke the silence. "You know that boy from Mexico I told you about? The one who wanted to learn to build chairs? He's got the steadiest hands I've seen in years." Liliana smiled. "I hired 3 new apprentices last week. One of them rebuilt an entire cabinet door by eye. No ruler, just instinct." "That's how you started," Henry said, sipping slowly. She nodded. "New Orleans is in 2 weeks. They're giving me a booth right near the entrance." Henry reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, one of his hand-drawn designs. It was a blueprint for a standing clock. Simple, elegant, humble. "This is for that vocational scholarship you were talking about," he said. "Put this one in the lobby." She ran her fingers along the inked lines, emotion rising behind her eyes. "I'm naming it the Henry Fund," she said. "Not because you're a grand figure, but because you never let me feel small." A little girl ran by, giggling, dragging a teddy bear behind her. Her hair was curly brown. Liliana followed her with her eyes and let out a quiet laugh. "I used to run like that." Henry looked at the clock. The minute hand clicked into place at the 12. "And now you walk like someone who knows where she's going." A waitress approached with an envelope. "Are you Liliana Quinn?" Inside was an official letter from the Savannah City Council. It was an invitation to attend the Cultural Pillars of the South Awards. She had been selected for her work preserving traditional crafts and uplifting local artisans. Liliana folded the letter, placed it beside her coffee cup, and stared out the window. The light outside had turned gold, catching on rooftops and peeling shutters. "I used to think I needed a wedding to be seen," she said quietly. "But I only needed a road and a steady pair of hands." Henry stood and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. They left the cafe together, the bell above the door giving one soft chime. Behind them, the old clock kept ticking, not loud, not faint, just enough to remind them the past still lingered, but the present had changed. Sometimes dignity doesn't arrive with applause, but in the quiet choice to walk away, to protect what's true, and to let go without bitterness. Healing isn't loud. It's steady. And justice often begins with a whisper no one expected to matter. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, subscribe, or share it with someone who needs it. Thank you for being here.